We see a woman shopping at a store for a front door camera system, security system for her home. She's in a new home in a gated community with its own security. She's recently moved in there with her husband. She's unpacking items. He asks her about the camera and whether or not they can afford the expensive piece of hardware and whether they need it in this community. But he remembers that she's been through some traumatic events in her life. That night, she remembers those events very clearly. She remembers when she was just a girl. She was woken up in the middle of the night, and there was a stranger that had entered her home. And that night, she would lose her parents to the stranger, and her life would be forever changed. An event that's haunted her all of her life. She's back home with the camera installed now. She has an app for it. One night, while her husband is out working, she's working on a hobby that she hopes to turn into a business. The app starts notifying her that there's some kind of activity at the door. It's late, and it kind of creeps her out a little bit. She approaches the door cautiously, trying to figure out what's going on, who's out there, but she doesn't see anybody on the app. She opens the door. What does she find? There's a raccoon digging through her garbage. She realizes that maybe she had let her fear get to her, but later that same night, as she's getting ready for bed, the app goes off again, and she sees a creepy looking old man standing in front of her front door. He starts kindly asking to let her in, and she says to go away. Then he starts to become more aggressive. He starts banging on the door. He starts yelling, "Let me in, I need to talk to you, let me in, I need to talk to you now." Her husband rushes home after she calls him. She's called the police. They talk to a neighbor who has a camera that shows their home as well. And as they start to review the footage, they don't see anybody who's ever at the door. They look back, they see the raccoon from earlier, but then an hour later, there's no sign that any kind of old man was at the home at all. The police start to realize that maybe this woman was freaking out or let her mind get away from her, maybe that she was dreaming. They ask her a series of questions. They don't believe her. She is very insistent that she saw what she saw, that somebody was banging on the door. They tell her to call back in case that person comes back, and then they leave. The next day, she's talking about it with her husband, and all of a sudden, that old man is back at their front door on the app. She's yelling for her husband to come over. He doesn't think it's serious until he also sees the old man standing in front of the door. The husband then calls the neighbor again, says, "Can you please bring up your security cameras? Do you see anybody in front of our home right now?" He's like, all right. He's chilling, just trying to enjoy his game. Pulls up his cameras. Nobody's there at the front door. But she's like, yeah, somebody is there right now. He's there. The neighbor doesn't see it. The next day, they're going over what happened, what could have happened, whether or not maybe she was just freaking out. Then she tells him that she remembers who this old man is. When she was in high school, there was a janitor that her and her friends had made fun of a lot. She one day told him that he looked good, and he became infatuated with her. He would begin leaving notes for her. So she does some research, and she heads to the family member, a sister of this janitor, trying to figure out where he's at, what he's up to these days. Maybe he's hacking into their system somehow because he's obsessed with them, stalking her. But the sister explains to her that the old man has been missing for a few months, and she has no idea where he's at. That he wasn't at computers, and maybe it was possible he could have hacked them. She returns home, once again, on her own. He's at the door. This time, she decides to face her fears. She opens the door, but nobody's there. The old man doesn't appear to be anywhere. She turns around, she heads back in home. The old man has now been invited in her home. He is standing there. He confronts her. She asks him, "What do you want? Are you here to hurt me?" He promises that he's not here to hurt her, but then he approaches her slowly, explaining that he knows exactly who she is and remembers the encounters that they had, that he had lied about not hurting her, that the intention of his visit was something else. She freaks out, but then she realizes He came to apologize. He came to tell her sorry for what happened, that he had scared her, that he had become infatuated with her when she was so young. And she then forgives him, and she lets him know that she's also sorry that they didn't treat him well. It seems like he's come to some kind of peace, and he vanishes in thin air, like his final business has been resolved. She feels some relief. Later on, though, another incident shows her on the news that the body of this missing man was discovered. He'd been missing for 2 months, and now he's been put to rest. Another aura shows up at her door, a young-looking woman begging to come in to talk to her husband. The husband, as soon as he sees the image of this woman and hears the voice, becomes very frantic, very angry and aggressive. He takes the phone away and he decides to destroy the camera. She goes and does some research, and she finds this park where this woman was at and a memorial for her. Her research tells her that this woman that showed up at their door as an aura was killed by a drunk driver. She wonders why this person would show up at their home, what they have to do, and why she wants to talk to her husband. So she comes back that night. She confronts her husband. She says his work can wait. She wants to know who the lady is. She explains that the research showed that these doorbell cameras have some kind of quantum physics that allow them to channel and attract the souls. He gets angry, aggressive, as he's being confronted about the woman. She shows up at the door again, wanting to be let in. He doesn't want to admit what's going on, but he starts to realize that he needs to come clean to his wife. He's not getting out of this. And so he explains to her who this woman is. He explains that that woman was his fiancée. They were engaged, but he at one point realized that he couldn't go through with it. He couldn't spend his life with her. And so he was at the park one night and he broke the news to her. She freaked out and didn't want to go with him. And then she took off and he drove off before she would later be struck by the drunk driver. And that's the last time that he saw her. The wife now feels some level of sympathy for the man and understands, but tells him that they need to let the ghost in so that they can finish up this business, that the lady probably just wants to make some kind of peace with him. After she opens the door, the ghost is able to enter the home, just like the old man had. The woman comes in, but she's carrying a baby. Something doesn't add up. The wife asks him what's going on. Then he reveals more about the story. She was actually pregnant with his kid. He didn't want the responsibility of becoming a dad and raising a child with her. So at that park, when they were arguing and he was trying to break it off, she was struck by the drunk driver at that point. The driver drove off. He was left in shock and awe. He looked and realized that she was still alive. She could have made it. She could have recovered. He walks slowly to her, seeing what's going on. He looks around and calls out to see if anybody else had witnessed what happened. He makes a choice then, knowing that he could solve his problem right there and then. And so he ends her right there. It's a dark thing. Then he reveals to his wife, now that she knows too much, he's going to have to do the same to her. But as he goes to strike her, he is held back by some kind of force. Some kind of supernatural force stops him, begins to choke him. And then it becomes clear that his business is now done. The ghost stares on angrily, getting some kind of final peace with his demise. The wife confronts all of this as he vanishes as well. Months later, she's moved into a new apartment and had one of these cameras installed by a service person there without her will. She doesn't remember having the app on her phone, but all of a sudden, there it is. And guess who's at the door? It's her husband. He's back. He wants to talk to her. He yells at her, bangs on the door, asking her to let him in, to let him come and talk. He has final business to settle with her. There won't be a happy ending at all. Maybe. There's no peace.